Dahlia had perfected the art of keeping her eyes down. It was the first rule of being a palace servant. Never look at the nobles. Never meet their gazes. Never give them any reason to notice you, because being noticed rarely ended well for people like her. So she kept her head bowed and her eyes fixed on the floor. She moved through the castle like a shadow, cleaning and polishing and serving, always present, but never seen. She had worked in Blackmore Castle for 3 years, and in all that time, she had never once looked directly at the Lycan king. She'd seen him, of course. Glimpses from the corner of her eye, the sweep of his dark cloak as he passed through the halls, the rumble of his voice in council chambers, the way servants and nobles alike parted before him like water before a ship. But she had never looked, never dared, until today. The Grand Library was empty when Dahlia arrived for her evening duties, or so she thought. She was halfway through dusting the ancient tomes on the western wall when a voice cut through the silence. "Look at me!" Dahlia froze. Her heart stuttered. Her hands, wrapped around her dusting cloth, began to tremble. She knew that voice. Everyone in the castle knew that voice. Deep and commanding, with an edge of power that seemed to vibrate in the very stones of the walls, the Lycan king. "I won't ask again." The voice was closer now, somehow soft and dangerous at the same time. "Look at me." Slowly, her entire body shaking, Dahlia turned and looked up. King Varen stood 3 paces away, watching her with eyes the colour of molten gold. He was everything the whispered stories claimed. Tall enough to block out the lamplight, broad-shouldered beneath his simple black tunic, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite. Harsh, beautiful, ancient. But it was the expression in those golden eyes that stole her breath. He was looking at her like he'd been waiting for this moment, like she was something precious he'd finally allowed himself to claim. "There you are," he murmured. "I've been wondering what colour your eyes were." Dahlia couldn't speak, couldn't think, could barely remember how to breathe. "Brown," Varen continued, a faint smile crossing his severe features. "Warm brown, like honey in sunlight. I suspected as much, but I couldn't be certain. You're very good at hiding them." "Your Majesty, I—" Her voice came out as a croak. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were here. I can come back later to finish—" "You've been avoiding me." The statement hung in the air between them, impossible to deny. "I've been doing my job," she whispered. "Servants aren't supposed to— We don't look at—" "I know what servants are supposed to do." He took a step closer, and she had to fight the urge to step back. "I know you've been trained to be invisible, to slip through halls without being noticed, to serve without being seen." His jaw tightened. "But I've noticed you, Dahlia. I've been noticing you for months." Months. The word hit her like a physical blow. "How do you know my name?" she breathed. "I know everything about you." Another step closer. She could smell him now. Pine and wood smoke and something wild, something that made her pulse race. "I know you were orphaned at 12 and came to work in the kitchens at 14. I know you were promoted to the cleaning staff 2 years ago because of your attention to detail. I know you work longer hours than any other servant in this castle, and never complain. I know you give half your wages to the orphanage where you grew up." Dahlia's legs threatened to give out beneath her. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you? Why would the king—" "Because you're my mate." The world stopped. Dahlia stared at him, certain she had misheard. Certain this was some cruel joke, some test she was failing spectacularly. "That's not possible," she said. "I'm a servant. I'm nobody. You're—" "I'm a man who has waited 300 years to find the other half of his soul." Varen's voice cracked on the words. "I felt it the moment you walked into the Great Hall for the first time, 3 years ago. I was holding court, listening to some lord drone on about border disputes, and suddenly every instinct I had screamed at me to look toward the servants' entrance." He paused, his golden eyes burning into hers. "You were carrying a tray of wine goblets. Your hands were trembling. First day nerves, I assumed. You kept your eyes fixed on the floor, so careful not to draw attention. But I couldn't look away." His voice dropped to something raw, almost broken. "I haven't been able to look away since." 3 years? Dahlia whispered. "You've been watching me for 3 years?" "Watching, waiting, trying to find a way to approach you without terrifying you." A bitter laugh escaped him. "I'm not good at this, at, at being gentle, at being patient. My advisors have been pushing me to choose a queen from the noble houses, and I've been putting them off with excuses because I couldn't—" He stopped abruptly, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed almost vulnerable. "I couldn't bear the thought of choosing anyone else," he finished quietly. "Not when you were here. Not when I passed you in the halls and felt my soul reach for yours every single time." Dahlia's mind was reeling. 3 years. 3 years of keeping her eyes down, of making herself invisible, of assuming she was nothing more than a shadow in the corners of the king's vast world. And all that time, he had been watching her, wanting her, waiting for her. "I don't understand," she said. If you felt this, why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I was afraid." The admission seemed to cost him. "I was afraid that if I approached you, I would overwhelm you, that you would run or refuse or look at me with fear instead of—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I've ruled this kingdom for 3 centuries. I've faced wars and rebellions and threats that would make most men weep. But the thought of you rejecting me was more terrifying than any of it." Something cracked inside Dahlia's chest. This ancient king, this impossibly powerful man, was standing before her and admitting to fear, to vulnerability, to 3 years of longing that he'd hidden behind silence and stolen glances. "You never spoke to me," she said slowly. "Not once. You never even looked at me when I served at your table." "I was looking," he said. "Always. I just made sure you didn't notice." His voice roughened. "I watched you serve wine and clear dishes and slip out of rooms without ever raising your eyes. I watched you laugh with the other servants in the kitchens when you thought no one was around. I watched you sneak bread to the stray cats behind the stables and read books in the library when you were supposed to be dusting." Dahlia's cheeks flushed hot. "You saw that?" "I saw everything." He took the final step that brought him within arm's reach. "I saw you, Dahlia. The real you, that you hide behind the bowed head and the downcast eyes. And I have spent 3 years trying to find the courage to tell you that you're the most extraordinary person I've ever known." Tears burned in her eyes. No one had ever called her extraordinary. No one had ever looked at her the way he was looking at her now, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire existence. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "Everything." The word was a confession, a prayer. "I want to know the sound of your laugh when you're not trying to be quiet. I want to hear your thoughts about the books you sneak from the library. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're beside me, and fall asleep every night with your heartbeat against my chest." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, not quite touching. But I won't take anything you don't want to give. I've waited 3 years. I'll wait 300 more if that's what you need. His voice dropped to a raw whisper. Just please, please don't run. Please give me a chance to prove that I'm worth looking at. Dahlia stared at him. This king who had watched her from shadows, who had memorized the details of her life, who stood before her now with his heart laid bare. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't look away. Okay, she breathed. Show me. Showing her, it turned out, meant starting from the beginning. Varin didn't sweep her into his arms and carry her to his chambers. He didn't declare her queen before the court or demand she move into the royal wing. Instead, he asked if she would have dinner with him. Just dinner. Just the two of them, in his private study, with food brought by servants who were carefully instructed to knock and wait for permission to enter. I don't want to overwhelm you, he explained when Dahlia arrived that first evening, still wearing her servant's dress because she had nothing else. I know this is a lot to process. 3 years of watching you, 3 years of wanting you. I've had time to adjust to these feelings. You've had an afternoon? You could have just ordered me to accept, she said quietly, still not quite able to believe any of this was real. You're the king. No one would have questioned it. I would have questioned it. His golden eyes were fierce. I don't want your obedience, Dahlia. I want your choice. I want you to stay because you want to, not because you feel you have to. So they had dinner, and they talked. Varin asked her questions, real questions, about her life and her thoughts and her dreams. He wanted to know about the books she'd been secretly reading, about her favorite passages, about the ideas that kept her up at night. He wanted to know about the orphanage where she'd grown up, about the children she still visited on her days off, about why she gave half her wages to people she could have left behind. They're my family, she said simply. The closest thing I have to one anyway. The older children looked after me when I was small. I look after the younger ones now. That's how it works. Most people leave the past behind when they escape poverty, Varin observed. They don't look back. I'm not most people. He smiled at that, a real smile, warm and surprised. No, you certainly aren't. In turn, Dahlia asked questions of her own. She learned that Varin had been king for nearly 3 centuries, that he'd watched generations of noble houses rise and fall, that he'd grown so accustomed to solitude that he'd almost stopped hoping for a mate. I thought perhaps I was broken, he admitted, that the bond simply didn't work for me. I watched my parents love each other for 500 years, and I wondered why the fates had denied me the same gift. And then I walked in with a tray of wine goblets, and my whole world shifted on its axis. His voice roughened. You have no idea, Dahlia, what it was like to finally feel that pull, to finally know that somewhere in this castle my mate was walking the same halls, breathing the same air. It was... He stopped, struggling for words. It was like being colorblind my entire life and suddenly seeing in full spectrum. The dinners became a nightly ritual. Every evening, after Dahlia finished her duties, she would change out of her work dress. Varin had provided her with new clothes, simple but beautiful, in colors she'd never been able to afford, and make her way to his study. Every evening, they would eat and talk and learn each other. She discovered that he hated mushrooms but loved honey cakes, that he read philosophy texts to relax and secretly wrote terrible poetry when he couldn't sleep, that he had a dry, subtle sense of humor that emerged only when he felt safe. He discovered that she had taught herself to read using discarded books from the castle garbage, that she dreamed of travelling to see the ocean, which she'd only ever read about, that she had a fierce protective streak that emerged whenever anyone threatened the people she loved. "You're remarkable," he said one evening, watching her describe a confrontation she'd had with a cook who was underpaying one of the younger servants. "You have no power, no status, no protection, and yet you stood up to someone who could have destroyed your livelihood." "Someone had to." Dahlia shrugged. "The younger servants can't protect themselves. If I don't speak up for them, no one will." "That's exactly the kind of queen this kingdom needs." Dahlia's heart stuttered. Queen. The word still felt impossible, like a dress made for someone else's body. "I'm not queen material," she said. "I don't know how to curtsy properly. I've never worn formal gowns. I couldn't name half the noble houses if my life depended on it." "Those things can be learned." Varin reached across the table and took her hand, gently, giving her every chance to pull away. "What can't be taught is the courage to stand up for the powerless, the kindness to remember where you came from, the integrity to do the right thing even when no one is watching." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Those qualities you have in abundance, Dahlia. Everything else is just details." She stared at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, his skin rough with centuries of sword work, hers still showing calluses from years of scrubbing floors. "Why does it matter?" she asked quietly. "Whether I'd be a good queen? We've only been talking for a few weeks. You barely know me." "I've known you for 3 years," he reminded her. "I've watched you when you didn't know anyone was looking. I know the shape of your character, even if I'm still learning the details." His grip on her hand tightened. "And I know that I love you." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. "You can't," Dahlia whispered. "It's too soon. You don't—" "I can." His golden eyes blazed with conviction. "I do. I have loved you since before we ever spoke, Dahlia. Loved the way you snuck bread to strays. Loved the way you checked on younger servants after their shifts. Loved the way you laughed when you thought no one could hear. That full, bright laugh that you hide from everyone else." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Varin." "You don't have to say it back." He released her hand and cupped her face instead, his touch impossibly gentle. "You don't have to feel what I feel. I just needed you to know. I needed you to understand that this isn't a whim or a passing fancy. I have loved you for 3 years, and I will love you for 300 more, whether you return those feelings or not." Dahlia thought of all the years she'd spent invisible, all the years of keeping her head down, expecting nothing, hoping for nothing. All the years of telling herself that servants didn't get happy endings. And here was a king, the king, kneeling before her in everything but body, offering her more than she'd ever dared to dream. "I don't know if I love you yet," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I don't know if I know what love feels like. But She took a breath. "I feel something. When I'm with you. Something warm and terrifying and new. Something that makes me want to stay." Varen's eyes went bright. "Then stay. Please. Stay. And let me spend every day trying to earn more of that something." She laughed through her tears. "You're the king. You shouldn't have to earn anything." "For you?" He pressed his forehead to hers. "I would earn everything. I would start from nothing and build my way up, if that's what it took. Just tell me what you need." "Time," she whispered. "I need time. To believe this is real. To understand what I'm feeling." To learn how to be. She gestured vaguely. Whatever I'm supposed to be now. You're supposed to be exactly who you are. He pulled back to look at her face. That's all I've ever wanted. Just Dahlia, the woman I've been watching for 3 years, the woman I fell in love with before I ever heard her voice. She didn't know what to say, so she did something she'd never done before. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was soft, tentative. Her first kiss, though she'd never admit it. But Varin responded like she'd given him the world, his hands cradling her face, his lips gentle against hers, his whole body trembling with restrained emotion. When they parted, they were both breathing hard. I'll wait, he promised, his voice rough. However long you need, I'll wait. Dahlia looked into his golden eyes, eyes that had been watching her for 3 years, waiting for this moment, and felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe she didn't know what love was yet, but she was starting to learn. Weeks turned into months, and Dahlia bloomed. It happened gradually, so slowly that she almost didn't notice. But Varin noticed. He noticed everything about her, always had. He noticed when she started walking through the castle with her head held higher, no longer shrinking into shadows when nobles passed. He noticed when she began to voice her opinions at their dinners, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. He noticed when she laughed without covering her mouth, when she smiled without ducking her head, when she looked at him directly instead of through lowered lashes. She was learning to take up space, to be seen, and she was beautiful. You're staring again, she said one evening, catching him watching her across the dinner table. I'm always staring. He didn't bother to deny it. I spent 3 years watching you from afar. Now that I can look at you openly, I intend to take full advantage. A flush crept up her cheeks, but she didn't look away. That was new too, the ability to hold his gaze without flinching. What do you see? She asked. When you look at me like that? Everything. He set down his wineglass and leaned forward. I see the woman who taught herself to read from garbage, the woman who gives half her wages to orphans, the woman who stands up for servants who can't protect themselves. His voice softened. I see the woman I love, the woman I've loved since before I knew the sound of her voice. Varin. I also see the woman who's been secretly meeting with my trade advisors. Dahlia's flush deepened to crimson. You know about that? I know everything that happens in my castle. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I particularly know when my advisors come to me with solutions to problems that have been plaguing them for months, and those solutions bear a remarkable resemblance to the ideas you mentioned at dinner the week before. She winced. I wasn't trying to overstep. They were struggling with the grain distribution issue. And I remembered what you said about the northern territories, and I thought, Dahlia. He cut her off gently. I'm not upset. I'm impressed. He reached across the table and took her hand. You solved in 3 meetings what my advisors couldn't figure out in 6 months. You've been helping the household staff restructure the cleaning rotations to be more efficient. You've been teaching the kitchen children to read during your lunch breaks. How do you... I told you. His golden eyes sparkled. I know everything. She laughed despite herself. That's either romantic or terrifying. I haven't decided which. Why not both? He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The point is, you're extraordinary. You've always been extraordinary. The only difference now is that you're starting to believe it yourself. The words hit something deep in her chest. For so long, she'd thought of herself as invisible, insignificant, a shadow moving through the edges of a world that didn't see her. But Varen had seen her, had always seen her, and now she was starting to see herself. "I love you," she said. The words escaped before she could stop them, unexpected, unpracticed, but utterly true. Varen went still. His hand tightened around hers. "Say that again," he whispered. "I love you." Now that she'd said it, she couldn't stop. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was the first night you asked about my favorite books. Maybe it was the way you listen when I talk, like my words actually matter. Maybe it was watching you write terrible poetry at 2 in the morning because you couldn't sleep." He laughed, the sound wet and bright. "You weren't supposed to see that. You weren't supposed to spend 3 years watching me dust libraries. I think we're even." She stood from her chair, circling the table to stand before him. "I love you, Varen. The king who watched me from shadows. The man who was afraid to speak to a servant. The fool who writes poetry about moonlight and— what was it? Something about eternal souls dancing in starfire. I'm burning that poem. Too late. I memorized it." He groaned, pulling her into his lap. "You're never going to let me forget that, are you?" "Never." She cupped his face in her hands, hands that were still rough from years of scrubbing, but softer now, cared for. "I love you. Every ridiculous, terrifying, beautiful part of you. I love that you watched me for 3 years because you were afraid of rejection. I love that you asked for my choice instead of demanding my obedience. I love that you see me, really see me, when I spent my whole life being invisible." Varen's eyes glistened with tears. "Dahlia!" "I'm not finished." She pressed a finger to his lips. "I love you, and I want to be with you. And I'm ready." "Ready?" His voice was hoarse. "For the bond, for the crown, for whatever comes next." She held his gaze, steady and sure. "I'm done hiding in shadows, Varen. I'm ready to stand in the light. With you." He kissed her. It wasn't soft this time, wasn't tentative. It was fierce and desperate, and full of 3 years of longing finally unleashed. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and she melted into him like she'd been made to fit there. When they finally parted, both gasping, his forehead pressed against hers. "I want to bond with you tonight," he said, his voice raw. "I want to mark you as mine, to feel you in my soul, to never again have to wonder if you're truly here. But only if you're certain, only if this is what you want." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." His hands trembled as they cupped her face. "The court will talk. The nobles will protest. A servant becoming queen. There will be resistance. Let them resist." She smiled, fierce and bright. "I've faced worse than noble sneers. I've faced poverty and hunger and years of being told I was nothing. The opinions of lords and ladies don't frighten me." Pride blazed in his golden eyes. "That's my queen." "Not yet." She rose from his lap and held out her hand. "But I will be. Tonight." He took her hand and let her lead him from the study. The bonding was private, just the two of them, in his chambers, with moonlight streaming through the windows. There were no witnesses, no ceremonies, no pomp, just Varen and Dahlia, finally claiming what had belonged to them since the moment she'd walked into his great hall with a tray of wine goblets. When his teeth sank into her neck, marking her as his mate, Dahlia felt the bond ignite like fire in her veins. She felt him flooding through her, his love, his devotion, his 3 years of desperate longing. She felt herself pouring into him, her wonder, her joy, her disbelief that this was actually her life now. They were one. They had always been one. They were just finally admitting it. Afterward, tangled together in his sheets, Varen traced the mate mark on her neck with reverent fingers. "You're mine now," he murmured. "Officially. Irrevocably. I was yours the moment you said, 'Look at me.'" She turned in his arms to face him. "I just didn't know it yet." He kissed her, soft and slow and full of promise. "No more shadows," he said. "No more hiding. No more keeping your eyes down. No more watching from afar," she countered. "No more terrible poetry about eternal souls." He laughed against her lips. "I make no promises about the poetry." She smiled, pressing closer, feeling his heartbeat sink with hers through the bond. For 3 years, she had been invisible. Now she was seen. Now she was loved. Now she was queen. And she would never look away again. The announcement came the next morning. Varen called an assembly of the entire court, every noble house, every advisor, every person of importance in the kingdom. They gathered in the great hall, whispers swirling like leaves in a storm, speculation running rampant about why the king had summoned them so urgently. And then Dahlia walked in. She wore a gown of deep crimson, the color of royalty, with silver embroidery that caught the light like captured stars. Her hair was swept up, revealing the mate mark on her neck for all to see. And her eyes, her warm brown eyes that she'd kept hidden for so long, were fixed straight ahead, meeting gazes without flinching. She looked like a queen. The whispers died. Varen rose from his throne and descended the dais, extending his hand to her. She took it, and together they turned to face the stunned assembly. "Lords and ladies of the realm," Varen announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "I present to you Dahlia, my bonded mate, and your queen." Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Then the whispers exploded. "A servant? The king has bonded with a servant? This is madness. The bloodlines, the succession. She was scrubbing floors a month ago. Now she wears the mate mark." Dahlia felt the familiar urge to shrink, to duck her head, to disappear into the shadows the way she'd done for so many years. But Varen's hand was steady around hers, and through the bond, she felt his fierce pride, his unwavering support. She would not hide. Not anymore. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice ringing clear through the hall. The whispers died as if cut by a blade. "A servant. An orphan. Someone who has no right to stand where I'm standing." She released Varen's hand and stepped forward, facing the assembled nobles alone. "You're right that I'm not noble-born. I grew up in an orphanage. I taught myself to read from books that nobles threw away. I spent years scrubbing your floors and washing your dishes and clearing your tables while you didn't even notice I existed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dahlia pressed on. "But I know this kingdom. I know its people. Not just the lords and ladies, but the servants and farmers and merchants who keep it running. I know what it's like to go hungry, because the grain distribution is broken. I know what it's like to work from dawn to dusk for wages that barely cover survival. I know what it's like to be invisible." She let her gaze sweep across the hall, meeting eyes that quickly looked away. "The king didn't choose me because of my bloodline or my dowry or my political connections. He chose me because of who I am, and I intend to be a queen who remembers where she came from. A queen who fights for the people no one else sees." Silence. Then, "Well said." The voice came from the back of the hall. A woman stepped forward, tall and elegant, with silver hair and eyes that held centuries of wisdom. Lady Astrid, Dahlia realized, one of the oldest and most powerful nobles in the realm. Varen's own grandmother's closest friend. "I remember when Varen's grandmother came to this court," Lady Astrid continued, her voice carrying easily. "She was a minor noble from a territory so small it barely appeared on maps. The court whispered about her, too. Said she wasn't worthy. Said she would never be accepted." She stopped directly in front of Dahlia, studying her with ancient eyes. "She became the greatest queen this kingdom has ever known." Lady Astrid smiled. "I see the same fire in you, child, the same refusal to be diminished." She turned to face the assembled nobles. "I, for one, welcome our new queen, and I would encourage the rest of you to do the same, before you find yourselves on the wrong side of history." One by one, the nobles began to bow. It wasn't unanimous. Dahlia could see the resistance in some faces, the resentment in others. There would be challenges ahead. There would be those who never accepted her. But for now, in this moment, she had won. Varen appeared at her side, his hand finding hers again. "That was magnificent," he murmured, for her ears alone. "I learned from watching you." "You learned from being you." He raised her hand to his lips. "My queen." The coronation was held 3 days later. It was smaller than most royal ceremonies. Varen had insisted on keeping it intimate, aware that Dahlia was still adjusting to her new life. But it was no less meaningful for its modesty. Dahlia knelt before the ancient throne, while the high priestess placed the crown upon her head, a delicate circlet of silver and rubies that caught the light like captured fire. "Rise, Queen Dahlia of Blackmoor." She rose, and as the hall erupted in cheers, she let her gaze find the servants standing along the walls, the people who had been her colleagues, her friends, her family for 3 years. They were crying, tears of joy, of pride, of hope that maybe, just maybe, one of their own could truly become something more. She smiled at them, really smiled, with her whole face, hiding nothing. This was for them, all of it. After the ceremony, when the feasting had begun and the nobles were busy congratulating each other on being wise enough to accept the new queen, Dahlia slipped away. She found the kitchens exactly as she'd left them, hot and crowded, and full of the controlled chaos of feeding hundreds. The servants froze when she entered, uncertain how to treat the woman who had been one of them just weeks ago. "Your Majesty," the head cook stammered, bowing awkwardly. "Is something wrong with the feast? If the food isn't satisfactory—" "The food is perfect," Dahlia said. "I just wanted to see everyone." She moved through the kitchen, greeting each servant by name, asking about their families, their health, their concerns. She hugged the kitchen children she'd been teaching to read. She clasped hands with the women who had taught her to scrub floors properly all those years ago. "You didn't forget us?" Old Marta whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. "You became queen, and you didn't forget." "How could I?" Dahlia squeezed her hands. "You're the ones who taught me everything. How to work hard, how to look after each other, how to keep going when everything seems impossible." She smiled through her own tears. "I'm only queen because of you, and I'm going to make sure no one ever forgets that." She stayed in the kitchen until Varen came looking for her, his golden eyes soft with understanding. "The nobles are asking where you've gone," he said. "Let them ask." She didn't move from Marta's side. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Varen smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his stern features into something beautiful. "That's my queen," he said, always remembering where she came from. He held out his hand. She took it. And together, they walked back to the feast, the servant who became queen, and the king who had watched her from shadows for 3 years, finally standing side by side in the light. 1 year later, Dahlia stood in the grand library where everything had changed. The same shelves lined the walls, filled with the same ancient tomes she'd once dusted in secret. The same windows let in the same afternoon light. The same quiet hung in the air, peaceful and still. But everything else was different. She was different. The woman who had once crept through these halls with her eyes fixed on the floor now walked with her head held high. The servant who had made herself invisible now commanded the attention of every room she entered. The orphan who had dreamed of nothing more than survival now dreamed of changing the world. And she was doing it. In the past year, Dahlia had transformed the kingdom. She'd established schools for the children of servants and labourers, places where they could learn to read and write and dream of futures beyond their parents' stations. She'd reformed the servant contracts, ensuring fair wages and reasonable hours and protections against abuse. She'd created pathways for commoners to rise through merit, not just birth. The nobles had grumbled. Some had outright resisted. But Lady Astrid had been right. They found themselves on the wrong side of history. The people loved their new queen with a fierce, protective devotion that made opposition dangerous. And through it all, Varin had been at her side. "You're thinking again." His voice came from the doorway. Dahlia turned to find him watching her with those golden eyes, the same eyes that had watched her for 3 years before she ever knew. "Just remembering," she said. "This is where you first spoke to me. This is where I finally stopped being a coward." He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. 3 years of watching you. 3 years of wanting you. And I nearly let my fear keep me silent forever. "What made you finally speak?" He was quiet for a moment, his chin resting on top of her head. "I saw you crying," he said softly. "2 days before I approached you. You were in this library alone and you were crying. I never found out why, but seeing your tears, seeing you hurt and not being able to comfort you, it broke something in me." Dahlia pulled back to look at him. "I remember that day. Old Marta had been ill. The healers said she might not survive. I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought I was going to lose the closest thing I had to family." "She's well now." "She is." Dahlia smiled. "She says it's because she had to live long enough to see me become queen. She refuses to miss a single moment." "A wise woman." Varin cupped her face in his hands. "But the point is, watching you cry was unbearable. I realized I couldn't spend another day in silence. Another day watching from shadows. Another day pretending that being near you without touching you was enough." His voice roughened. "So, I came to this library, and I asked you to look at me. And I did." "And you did." He pressed his forehead to hers, "and everything changed." They stood together in the quiet, two souls that had found each other against all odds. "I have something to tell you," Dahlia said. Something in her voice made Varin pull back, his eyes searching her face. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She took his hands and placed them on her stomach, her still flat stomach, but not for long. "Something's very, very right." Varin went absolutely still. "Are you—" "I am." "We're going to—" "We are." His eyes filled with tears. His hands trembled against her belly, and then he dropped to his knees before her, the same way he had knelt in spirit that first night, when he'd bared his heart and begged for a chance. "A child," he breathed. "Our child. Our child." Dahlia ran her fingers through his hair. "An heir who will be born to a servant queen and an ancient king. A child who will grow up knowing that worth isn't measured by bloodlines or birthrights. A child who will be loved," Varen said fiercely, desperately, completely, from their first breath to our last. He pressed a kiss to her stomach, then rose to sweep her into his arms. "I love you," he said, his voice cracking. "I have loved you since before I knew your name. I will love you until the stars burn out and the world turns to dust. And now," he kissed her, deep and reverent, "now I get to love our child too." "You're going to be an insufferable father, aren't you?" "Absolutely." He grinned through his tears. "I'm going to watch our child the same way I watched you. I'm going to memorize every detail, every laugh, every milestone. I'm going to be completely obsessed." Dahlia laughed. "Like father, like child, I suppose. Like mother, like child." He set her down, but kept her close. "They're going to be extraordinary, Dahlia. With you as their mother, how could they be anything else?" She kissed him again, overwhelmed by love and joy and the sheer impossibility of her life. 3 years ago, she had been a servant who kept her eyes down, a shadow who moved through corners, invisible and forgotten. A woman who had taught herself to expect nothing because expecting something only led to disappointment. Now she was a queen, a wife, a mother-to-be, a woman who had changed a kingdom and touched thousands of lives, a woman who was loved, fiercely, devotedly, by a king who had watched her from shadows and chosen her above all others. "Look at me," she whispered. Varen's eyes met hers, golden, ancient, burning with a love that had waited 300 years to find her. "I'm always looking," he said. "I can't stop. I never could." She smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Good," she said. "Don't ever stop." He pulled her close, and they stood together in the library where it had all begun, the servant who became queen and the king who had loved her in secret, finally and forever in the light. Once, she had kept her eyes down, afraid of being seen. Now she lifted her gaze to meet the world, and she would never look away again. If you enjoyed Dahlia and Varen's story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Leave a comment below telling me your favorite part, and I'll see you in the next one.